Good morning, everyone. This is Debbie Hart, the President and CEO of BioNJ, and I'd like to thank you for joining us for today's legislative briefing, Vaccines 101, Research and Development in the Age of COVID-19. I hope you're all staying safe and well, and we're so thrilled to have you with us. So during this unprecedented time, we're extremely proud of the unwavering commitment and tireless work being done by New Jersey's life sciences ecosystem to bring forward antiviral therapies and vaccines to combat COVID-19. Just as importantly, we thank the legislature for your responsiveness and dedication to ensuring the safety and the health of the great state of New Jersey. As BioNJ's tagline reads, because patients can't wait, and that's why today's program is so important. We are thrilled to present today's webinar in partnership with the New Jersey Immunization Network, and we're delighted to have a knowledgeable group of experts with us this morning. Over the next hour, our presenters will share valuable insights on the process of researching, developing, and manufacturing vaccines, particularly in the age of COVID-19. We'll end the session with audience Q&A. Before we get started, this is a listen-only webinar. We encourage you to submit questions via the dialog box on your computer screen. We have a good-sized group on the line, and we'll try to get to as many of your questions as possible at the end of the presentations. If we don't get to your question, we promise that we'll come back to you after the webinar with a response. So let's get started. It is with great pleasure that I introduce our first speaker to kick off this morning's program. Having served as the Assemblyman for New Jersey's 7th Legislative District for 22 years, he's a leader in the Democratic majority, chairman of the Health Committee, member of the Appropriations Committee, and a member of the Science, Innovation, and Technology Committee. And in fact, our speaker is the only member of the New Jersey State Legislature with both a medical and a law degree. He also serves as the director of the Burlington County Health Department. It is my great pleasure to welcome the delightful Assemblyman Herb Conaway. Assemblyman, please, over to you.
Oh, delightful on a fine morning. I haven't heard that one in a while, but I appreciate that to start us off. It elevates my spirits even more than they usually are. But good morning, everyone. I am delighted to be able to spend some time with you this morning talking about an issue which is of great concern, and a great concern to me as a chair of the Health Committee, as a citizen who takes as part of his responsibility the care of New Jerseyans writ large, and certainly no group in our society deserves more care than our children, who have to grow up in an environment that that has its share of dangers, and fortunately, with the science that's been developed over decades, many of these dangers we're able to prevent, and I'm talking about vaccine preventable disease. One of the things that concerns me is as we think about coronavirus, as we must these days, it's on the at the forefront of the mind of most of us, but certainly those of us who are in the trenches working in healthcare. It is of great concern, and it's viewed with alarm, although I guess not surprised, given the situation that we're finding that vaccine rates are down significantly right straight across the country. And again, not surprising, many doctors' offices who, and particularly pediatricians and family physicians, who carry on the bulk of the vaccinations for our children across the nation. The in-office visits are down because people, quite frankly, are concerned about their safety in entering offices. Unfortunately, in spite of warnings that have been really sounded by influential people for 5 years, our country was ill prepared to deal with this pandemic. And so we come to understand that in doctors' offices there was not enough personal protective equipment to continue in-person operations in a safe manner, safe for not only the physicians and other healthcare providers and their staffs, but patients who need to come into the office and seeking care. And as I've just mentioned, a lot of these, and particularly in those offices, involve young children who need to stay on schedule with their vaccinations. It's one of the important aspects of vaccine policy that the vaccines be given on time to deal with those moments in a child's life, in a person's life, when they're at most risk from highly contagious diseases such as measles and whooping cough, for example. So we are, in my office, we're planning on trying to sort of supplement and help this process of getting vaccinations. Is part of our responsibility anyway. We do this routinely for people who don't have a primary care physician, who need to get access to care, who have issues with insurance. But we realize that we're going to have to step up and fill the breach, particularly safety breach, because we have good access to appropriate personal protective equipment, perhaps better than in the private offices still today, although that's improving. Because we have been giving, or rather collecting specimens for COVID-19 in a safe manner, that will carry some weight with the public as we move into the area of vaccine administration, which we must do. If we're not careful, we're going to find ourselves looking at at further outbreaks of vaccine-preventable diseases such as measles and whooping cough. And when you consider that right now we are at least hopefully that situation will change and is changing. You've got orders for flu vaccine that are down. So, and the very young are vulnerable, as well as the very old, and certainly in a fall that's going to see widely circulating coronavirus in our society, it's going to be critical that people, children, and right straight across all age groups gets vaccination against seasonal flu. Can you imagine having to deal with a flu and a coronavirus disease at the same time? And so, that is a scenario that's a nightmare scenario, and so we have to do all we can in terms of our public health messaging and our seasonal flu vaccine supply chain, making sure that's delivered, or as orders are done, that it's delivered to the outlets where these vaccines will need to be given, and get these vaccines into people so that they can work to at least deal with what we know we can manage well enough on the flu side, so that we can lessen the impact of a combined flu and perhaps resurgent coronavirus season coming here this fall. So the challenges are significant, not the least of which are the sort of continued dissemination of false and misleading information to the public related to the efficacy and safety of vaccines. It is, I have to say, it amazes me when you understand that people who have been shown to have committed fraud in the public, had their licenses removed, are paraded about parts of the country as heroes when they have shown to be bold-faced liars. I don't understand it, but I think I guess the world we live in, when you can basically say anything and sort of get away with it. It is for those of us who understand the science and who believe in dealing with facts and who stand on them as and really use them as a shield and use them as the important part of advocating a position. We just have to keep pressing forward and doing the job that we need to do in public health messaging, and let people know that the vaccines, particularly childhood vaccines that are currently on the market and in use and recommended, have been proven over and over again to be safe and effective, and will work in a way that they are designed for the vast majority of people who need to use them. And hopefully that, along with a growing confidence that we can deliver and administer these vaccines safely, we will at least get to par and perhaps go beyond par with respect to the vaccination rates. in our country. It's critical at this time when we're fighting off one, terribly destructive contagion, that we don't let our guard down and allow these known pathogens and these preventable pathogens from gaining a foothold in this unfortunately dangerous environment in which we find ourselves. So with that, I'll just say that I, for one, and I think the country owes a great debt to the scientists, the bench scientists, the clinical scientists, the physicians, the manufacturers of these life-saving medications that we can get out to protect our own citizens, indeed to help protect citizens straight across the world. We can't do that without being on the leading edge in terms of science and technology that this country is and has been for some time, and we have to make sure we maintain that, of course, with a great educational system and taking advantage of the talent that's all around the world to come to a free country and to apply their skills, to apply their knowledge, to apply their dedication in a great cause, and that is to end the scourges of mankind. It's a great calling, and right straight across the talent pool, we need our engineers, we need our mathematicians, we need our financial people, we need our manufacturing geniuses, we need our bench scientists, and we need people who are committed to doing good and to doing right by their fellow citizens. So thank you for all that you do, and as I can, as is appropriate, we'll help on the legislative front as we can. Thanks for the time this morning.
Thank you so much, Assemblyman. Much appreciate your words. Important. Next, we're going to hear from our panel of experts on vaccine development in the age of COVID-19. Our first panelist is the director of the Vaccine Education Center at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, as well as the Maurice R. Hilleman Professor of Vaccinology and a Professor of Pediatrics at the Perelman School of Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania. He's the recipient of many, many awards, including the J. Edmund Bradley Prize for Excellence in Pediatrics from the University of Maryland Medical School, the Young Investigator Award in Vaccine Development from the Infectious Disease Society of America, and a Research Career Development Award from the National Institutes of Health. Very much deserved. This incredible man who we're going to hear from in a moment. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Paul Offit. Dr. Offit, over to you.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to try and summarize a very difficult subject in about 10 minutes, which is where we stand on this COVID-19 vaccine. So first, the good news. There is an enormous amount of interest and money and expertise in making this vaccine. There's more than 120 investigational new drug applications that have been submitted to the Food and Drug Administration. There are more than 70 companies across the globe that are interested in making a vaccine. BARDA, which stands for the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, which is part of Health and Human Services, has given billions of dollars to serve as a pull mechanism for a number of companies to make this vaccine. The virus is stable, meaning it's not like influenza where it mutates from one year to the next, so much so that immunization or natural infection one year doesn't protect you the next year. So that's good. I think it means we're not going to need a yearly vaccine as we do for influenza. And you know the protein you're interested in. You know the part of the virus you're interested in. It's that spike protein that emanates from the surface of the virus. That's the part of the virus that attaches the virus to cells. So if you can prevent the virus from attaching to cells with antibodies, then you can prevent infection. So we know all that. That's good. What's more challenging is that we really don't know how to make this vaccine. As a consequence, we're using all possible strategies to make it. And hopefully several will rise to the top, as well as some strategies that have never been used to make the vaccine. So, for example, a Chinese group has taken the virus, grown it up, and inactivated it with a chemical, so a whole killed viral vaccine approach. That's the approach that we use currently to make the inactivated polio vaccine, the hepatitis A vaccine, or the rabies vaccine. Some groups are taking the virus and weakening it. This is the way we make the measles vaccine, the mumps vaccine, the German measles vaccine, the chickenpox vaccine. one of the rotavirus vaccines. Some groups are using a purified protein approach, meaning take that spike protein, purify it, and then give that to the patient. So you're inducing an immune response just against that protein. That's the way we make the hepatitis B vaccine. That's the way we make the human papillomavirus vaccine. Another approach that's been used, it's gotten actually most of the play in the media because it's the approach that's been used by this UK Oxford group as well as Johnson & Johnson. As well as a Chinese group, which is to use a so-called vectored vaccine, meaning you take a weak virus, the virus that doesn't cause harm, and then you sort of genetically engineer it so it can express that protein that you're interested in. So in other words, essentially your body then makes that protein of interest, the spike protein, and then you make a response against it. The other approaches that are used that have never been used really before to make a commercial vaccine is to take so-called messenger RNA, which is to say genetic material that then instructs your body how to code for a protein. Again, it would be the spike protein. That's an approach that's being used by Moderna as well as Pfizer, and I'm sure Dr. Dormitzer later will explain to you his company's strategy for making that vaccine. And then lastly, to take a DNA vaccine, which is again sort of you inoculate somebody with the genetic material that instructs their body for how to make that protein. And that's an approach that's being used by Inovio. So typically it takes about 20 years to make a vaccine, meaning from having the virus, and we only got this virus a few months ago, to actually having a vaccine. So why is it, or how is it, that we could possibly make a vaccine in a year and a half or somewhere in that area? I think there's a few reasons. One is you have many, many companies that are trying to do this, so that's not typical. Usually it's just a couple or maybe 3 companies that are interested in making a vaccine. The animal model studies that are done to sort of prove the concept that you have for how a vaccine might work are done much more quickly and probably a little less extensively than would be done normally for a vaccine. The so-called phase 1 and phase 2 studies, which usually involve making sure that you have the right dose of vaccine, making sure that you can consistently get an immune response, making sure that at least in hundreds of people that the vaccine is safe, is also being done much more quickly and generally in somewhat fewer patients than might typically be done. And then lastly, I think most importantly, the key thing that you need to know about these vaccines is whether they work and whether they're safe. And you don't know whether they're going to work until you do a so-called efficacy trial, because although you may have an excellent immune response, you don't know whether that immune response is protective. You don't know that until you do an efficacy trial. And typically efficacy trials, safety trials are big. I mean, I was fortunate enough to be part of a team at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia that developed the rotavirus vaccine. That efficacy trial, safety trial, was a prospective, placebo-controlled 70,000 infant, 4-year, 11-country trial. The other rotavirus vaccine was a 60,000 person trial. The human papillomavirus vaccine was a 30,000 person trial over 7 years. So the conjugate pneumococcal vaccine, which we currently use, was about a 35,000 person trial. So I'm actually on the National Institutes of Health so-called active group that was put together by Francis Collins to facilitate and accelerate the development of the vaccine. What we're proposing, and we're starting in July, there are going to be a number of BARDA-funded programs that are going to be part of this large placebo-controlled safety efficacy trial where about 20,000 people will get a vaccine, 10,000 will get a placebo, and that has to play out. I think the science here has to play out. What I worry about a little bit is we have another way to sort of make this a much faster process is we have the Warp Speed program, whereby essentially you're manufacturing the vaccine at risk. In other words, a number of vaccines are being mass produced without knowing whether they're safe or whether they work. And then hopefully when you do this large placebo-controlled safety efficacy trial and you find out that it works and it's safe, you'll be ready to roll it right off the shelves, which interestingly is not new. This has a precedent in the polio vaccine in the 1950s. Essentially, there were 5 companies that made the vaccine while they were doing a safety efficacy trial, and when the vaccine was shown to be safe and it worked, then we were immediately able to give the vaccine. The one concern that I have is aside from the fact that for the most part it's been kind of science by press release, we don't know a lot about these vaccines yet unless they get published in medical journals, is that with that Warp Speed program, you're going to have tens of millions of doses that are available by the end of the year. And when you see press releases that say we think we can have this vaccine ready by October, you want to make sure that those placebo-controlled safety efficacy trials are done before this vaccine ever gets put into the arms of American people. Because remember that most of the people who are going to get this vaccine are healthy young people who would not normally die of this virus, and you want to hold this vaccine to a high standard of safety and efficacy. So that's all I have, and I turn it over to the next speaker.
Thank you so much, Dr. Offit. Thank you. So our next presenter represents one of the more than 400 companies around the world that are working on COVID-19, various aspects of it. And in fact, this particular company is considered, the work that they're doing is considered among the most promising vaccine approaches. And our speaker leads Pfizer's viral vaccines research and development programs that include a perfusion F-based RSV vaccine, a cytomegalovirus vaccine, an RNA-based influenza vaccine collaboration with BioNTech, and an RNA-based COVID-19 vaccine collaboration with BioNTech. Before joining Pfizer, he held positions at Novartis Vaccines that included head of U.S. research. He was the founding member of the Novartis Viral Vaccine Research Center. So please, Dr. Philip Dormitzer, welcome, and thank you so much for taking your time with us today.
Well, thanks so much for having me. And I guess you could add to my credentials, I was once the lab mate of Paul Offit a long time ago at the Palo Alto VA Hospital. Today I have the pleasure of telling you a little bit about Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine program. Next slide, please. There's an obligatory statement on the next slide. There we are. Maybe with that having been shown, we can move on to the next slide. Pfizer's purpose overall is to develop breakthroughs that change people's lives. And certainly, COVID-19 is changing our lives, and a vaccine would certainly change our lives in the right direction. In fact, vaccines really are the long-term solution for this pandemic, because pandemics really end when herd immunity builds up. And herd immunity builds up when people either get a vaccine to build that immunity or get infected. And certainly getting a vaccine is the far gentler and preferable way to build up herd immunity. And so we're working together with BioNTech, a group that we worked with since August of 2018 to develop an RNA flu vaccine. So it's been a very natural thing to transition that collaboration now to a COVID-19 vaccine development effort. Next slide, please. This has been a very real whirlwind of an outbreak. We first learned about these cases of pneumonia in Wuhan in December. In January, the Chinese government identified the virus and released the sequence. And a mere 2 months later, a pandemic was declared. When that sequence was released, our collaborators at BioNTech, a German biotech company that has the industry's most diversified portfolio of RNA technologies, immediately took the collaborative work we were doing, swapped out the RNAs that encoded influenza antigens, and swapped in the RNAs that encode the SARS-CoV-2 antigens, that is the antigens of the virus that causes COVID-19. Next slide, please. This vaccine effort, the collaboration between BioNTech and Pfizer, is actually one part of really a three-pronged strategy that Pfizer is taking to combat this pandemic. In addition to the vaccine, Pfizer had an antiviral program in around 2003, 2004, during the SARS outbreak. This virus is very closely related to SARS. Now, that antiviral program got put on the shelf when SARS was contained by conventional public health measures. And when SARS-CoV-2 emerged, we then started taking our compounds and asking the question, are they also active against this new virus? On that basis, we are now advancing a candidate antiviral as well. Pfizer makes a variety of medications that have potential utility, though not directly antiviral, but can have other utility. For example, immunomodulators to combat the overexuberant immune response that may sometimes contribute to some of the clinical deterioration that we see in those with COVID-19. But what I will focus on is, of course, the vaccine. Next slide, please. So I mentioned the partnership with BioNTech. It's a German company that has not only the basic science capability in RNA vaccines, but also manufacturing capability, so that the clinical trial material that is now being tested both in the US and in Germany is currently made by BioNTech. So as we expand, we'll be bringing on US manufacturing capacity as well. Next slide. We are using the messenger RNA platform, a rather new platform, which has a particular advantage that led us to want to use this platform for influenza. Influenza vaccines are some of the only in fact, it is the only mass-produced biological or pharmaceutical product that has to be changed constantly because the virus changes constantly. And RNA vaccines are particularly easy to change because one piece of RNA is more like another piece of RNA than one virus is like another or one protein is like another. So that ability to keep up with flu strain changes also makes it a very apt platform for emerging diseases, such as this one, that arise, say, in December and are a worldwide pandemic by March. Next slide, please. And these work a little differently than most vaccines, and Paul alluded to this, that in most vaccines, either a weakened virus or perhaps just a piece of a virus, a non-infectious piece of a virus, is injected so you have an immune response against that piece that is presented in the vaccine. An mRNA vaccine does not include any antigens. Instead, it includes the instructions for your body to make the antigen. So that instruction is a piece of RNA. It's formulated together with a collection of lipids whose job it is to deliver that RNA into a cell so that cell can start to produce the antigen. Next slide. And as it turns out, and I won't get too deep into the technical details here, there are many flavors of this sort of RNA. And one approach that actually both BioNTech and Pfizer share is a belief that certain questions are best answered through clinical study. Much as Paul alluded to, that until you really tested something in the clinic, you can do all the preclinical animal experiments you want, but you don't really know how it's going to perform until you see how it performs in people. So very briefly, the RNA vaccines that we're testing in the clinic include unmodified RNA, much like the messenger RNA in your body, nucleoside modified RNA, which can be thought of sort of a stealth RNA that evades being shut down by your immune system before it can express the antigen, so you can have an adaptive, meaning an antibody or T cell response to the antigen. And self-amplifying RNA, which is not a virus, but it does include one viral enzyme that makes the RNA replicate, but not spread, so that it looks to your immune system like a viral infection, bringing the potential for very low doses to give very powerful immune responses. Next slide, please. And so with those candidates, we have entered a pair of studies. One is in Germany, the second in the US. In Germany, we started in April 23rd, and in the US on May 4th. And both of them start off relatively similarly, exploring multiple hypotheses. Which of the 4 vaccine candidates works best? What dose should it be administered at? How does it perform in young adults and older adults? And what schedule of doses are best? And as you can imagine, if you were to multiply all those possibilities together, you come up with something like 72 different groups, which is impractical. So a part of this study is a dynamic study. As we go in close consultation with the FDA, we review the results in almost real time. So as we find out what works better, we can drop the things that don't work as well. focusing in on the final vaccine candidate, dose, and regimen to do just what Paul described, and that is a large study to establish safety and possibly establish efficacy. Now, there's one thing about an efficacy study: you need the virus to cooperate, and that is, and by the virus cooperating, we don't mean being nice. If you want to do an efficacy study, there has to be a high enough attack rate. If we're successful, and we hope that we are successful in containing the virus, the attack rate will be too low to do an efficacy study. So in parallel with preparing to do a large efficacy study, we're also doing the work to follow FDA paths to license a vaccine based on correlates of protection derived through both animal studies and studies of how the vaccine behaves in humans, so that if we manage to contain the virus, we can still advance the vaccine, because just because the virus is contained doesn't mean it's going to go away, and there will still be a strong need for a vaccine. And clearly, one thing that is very important in all of this is flexibility, because it is impossible to predict exactly what this virus is going to do. Nevertheless, we're talking about large numbers of subjects. To a minimum, establish the kind of safety database that will give confidence that this vaccine is safe and also provide the evidence that is needed for efficacy. Next slide. The next major part is, of course, producing the vaccine. It's all fine to be able to launch your first dose, but to immunize people, you need large manufacturing capacity. And we'll be employing Pfizer's network. And again, as Dr. Offit mentioned, we are investing at risk in manufacturing capacity. We have, for example, sites in St. Louis to make the DNA from which we make the RNA vaccine, in Andover, Massachusetts to make the RNA, in Kalamazoo, Michigan to make the lipid formulation of the vaccine, and we may even be doing some packaging also in Perth, Belgium for Europeans as well. So together with a very intensive effort to develop the vaccine, test it clinically, we're also ramping up our efforts to manufacture sufficient quantities of the vaccine as well. And with that, I'll turn it over to the next speaker.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Dr. Dormitzer. You gave us a little hope today, and we very much appreciate that, and Godspeed in your great work. So our next panelist, perspective, Erica DeWald is the Director of Advocacy for Vaccinate Your Family, the next generation of Every Child by Two, an organization dedicated to ensuring everyone is protected against dangerous vaccine-preventable diseases. She leads efforts at the local, state, and federal levels to educate legislators, media, and the public about the value of vaccines. So the perfect speaker for us today. So welcome to you, Erica. Over to you.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity. The other two speakers talked a lot about the development of the vaccine, but I'd like to talk a little bit about then getting that vaccine to people. We know that vaccines are only effective if people actually receive them. So next slide. In a pre-COVID world, we already had some access issues to childhood and adult vaccines. So as you can see from this chart, if a child is uninsured, even if a child has Medicaid, they're far less likely to receive necessary vaccines, routinely recommended vaccines, than those who are on private insurance. Next slide. And unfortunately, this issue is not just confined to children. When you look at adult vaccination rates, we see something that we've actually managed to eliminate in childhood vaccines, which is racial disparities among adults. So as you can see from the slide, we weren't doing a great job at vaccinating adults in general. This is the former shingles vaccine, not the new one. So we'll wait to see if that data has improved at all. But we're not vaccinating a lot of adults to begin with. And then when you break it down and see these racial disparities, we've got a problem. Now, next slide. This problem has been compounded during the time of COVID. So as the Assemblyman mentioned, we have seen a drastic decline in childhood vaccinations during this time. And as he said, it makes sense, right? If you're told to stay at home, the last place you want to take your healthy children is to the doctor's office, where they could be potentially exposed to COVID or other illnesses. And so what we've seen is that the Vaccines for Children program, which provides vaccines free of charge to about 50% of children in the United States, they have ordered 400,000 less doses of MMR, the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, than you would expect expect at this point of time in the year. That's a huge drop. And then when we look at the Vaccine Safety Data Link, so Vaccine Safety Data Link is a process with 8 healthcare organizations throughout the country, 5 Kaiser organizations, some folks up in Wisconsin, out in Massachusetts, that proactively follow the safety of vaccines, right? So a child receives a vaccine, they can then follow to see if there are any adverse events that child suffers, and therefore they can see if there's any link between vaccines and an adverse event. Those healthcare systems, so just 8 healthcare systems, were down 1,500 doses administered. So now we're not just talking about orders, we're talking about vaccines that actually got to children. They were down 1,500 doses in those children under 24 months and down over 2,000 doses in those children over 24 months. Now, these doses started to pick up just a little bit at the end of the study period, which was end of March, beginning of April. But again, these are just 8 sites that work closely with CDC and are really good at making sure kids get in to get their vaccines. So next slide. What are people actually recommending? The recommendation from CDC, AAP, and others is slightly different from children to adults. So for children, they are still encouraging that children go to well visits and they continue to get their vaccines. As the Assemblyman said, we don't want to end a pandemic with an epidemic of something like measles. And we also know that flu season is coming. So a lot of providers are doing what they can to separate well patients and sick patients. At my children's pediatrician, my younger son was just had his 18-month vaccines. They have 2 locations. So they're very lucky that they can do sick children at one, they can do well children another. Most places only have 1 location. So they might be seeing well children in the morning, sick children in the afternoon, so that they can thoroughly disinfect the offices before they see well children again. Whereas adults, the recommendation is actually to hold on vaccine-only visits unless the risk outweighs or the benefits outweigh the risk. So if you have an adult who you think really needs this vaccine, they're for whatever reason, low risk of a COVID infection, you might call them in anyway. But do take those opportunities as providers to vaccinate adults who are coming in for sick visits. So make sure that you are evaluating each adult that comes through your door to see if you can get them up to date on their vaccines while they're there. So what we're doing at Vaccinate Your Family, next slide please, is making sure that the public knows that they can reach out to their providers and ask them what measures they're taking to keep children safe. So we're really trying to push this message of don't cancel, call. Make sure that you are doing the best to protect yourself and your children so that we're as healthy as possible coming out of this pandemic. But what I really want to focus on is these 5 points. What can policymakers do now? So we already know we have an access problem. That access problem has been compounded by COVID. What can we do as policymakers to make sure that people are able to get their vaccines now, that they're able to get a COVID vaccine when it becomes available, and that we can keep these vaccination rates high? So the first thing that we really need to do is to make sure that all of our health, public health departments, immunization departments, public health clinics are fully staffed. We know that a lot of the burden of delivering this vaccine is going to fall to these members of the Department of Health, as well as our federally qualified health clinics and our rural health clinics, which I know we still have some in New Jersey. We need to make sure that they have the people they need to enroll providers, right? We're going to need more providers providing vaccine, that we can enroll those providers, that we can get the vaccine distributed to the right people, depending on who the vaccine is recommended for, whether it's the elderly, whether it's those with comorbid conditions. That can change the partners that you need at the table to get that vaccine out. So the next step then is to take a hard look at the Immunization Information System, the IIS, to make sure that it has everything we need to upload all information about people getting a vaccine. We don't want to double count anyone, particularly because we suspect we won't have a glut of vaccines at the beginning, right? Manufacturing is going to take a while to make the however many billions of vaccines that we'll ultimately need. So make sure that the IIS is compatible with not only childhood information, but adults as well, that everybody who gives a vaccine is able to report into the system so that we're keeping good track of who's getting a vaccine. And along those lines, is it time to reevaluate pharmacist vaccination laws? obviously, we want to make 100% sure that people are maintaining a medical home. If they don't have a medical home, that they are finding one, particularly during this time. But it may make sense if we have to do a mass vaccination. Certainly, we want to do that this flu season. Hopefully, we will want to do that soon for COVID. Pharmacists are a great solution for getting more people vaccinated quickly. And, let's plan for vaccine distribution now. What does that look like? As I said, there may be different populations that will be recommended for the first wave of vaccination. If it is the elderly, how are you communicating with senior centers, senior living facilities, nursing homes to make sure that they have the staff and the know-how to get that vaccine to their residents? If it's those with comorbidities, we know that unfortunately a lot of people who live at or below the poverty line have a lot of comorbidities. Are we working with our Department of Housing to make sure that maybe there's a partnership there where we can deliver vaccines through the Department of Housing? And then finally, I know this is tough. This is particularly tough now when state budgets have been absolutely devastated, but they've been devastated because of an infectious disease. And this really drives home the point that we need state-level funding for immunization and for strengthening the public health infrastructure. The federal government has been underfunding public health infrastructure for many years now. They are flooding as much money as they can into these areas, but that's not sustainable. And so we need to obviously accept the help from the feds where we can get it, but we really need to make sure that New Jersey is looking out for New Jerseyans when it comes to infectious disease. So with that, thank you. I just wanted to give a quick overview and very happy to take questions with the rest of the speakers.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Erica. That was perfect. And thank you to all of our panelists as well as Assemblyman Conaway. So it's now time for Q&A. If you do have a question, you can type them in on the box on your screen. We do have a couple of questions from a couple of our legislator participants. And the first question is there a plan to have the children's vaccinations that were missed to get back on schedule? So I'm thinking Dr. Conaway, Dr. Offit, or Erica. One of you want to grab this question?
Well, there is a process, Dr. Conaway speaking, for making up vaccines, and we do that in the school immunization program for people who are coming from other jurisdictions or entering the school who just haven't been perhaps uninsured, just had not gotten their vaccines as they should have on the appropriate schedule. And so as long as there's a catch-up schedule for all the vaccines, all the childhood vaccines that need to be given, and particularly for those kids who are entering the school system, as long as they get themselves on the recommended schedule, they can go enter school. And so it is, basically, where are you? Where do you need to go? What's the appropriate catch-up schedule? That's what we'll apply going forward.
Terrific. Thank you, Assemblyman. Anyone else want to add to that?
And this is Erica. I just want to add, this is part of our public campaign too, is when you call your child's provider, not everyone is able to give vaccines right now. So we're encouraging parents to ask what the plan is. When should I call back, or will you call me?
Great, thank you. So another question from our audience. Does anyone have a sense of what populations may be targeted for a COVID-19 vaccine administration? And will it depend on perhaps the type of vaccine?
Yeah, I can. It's Paul. I can try and address that. I think that at least the current plan for testing the vaccine, at least through the NIH active group, is to test adults, including older adults, and to have sort of a representative population, or a population that represents, the makeup of the United States. There is no plan to test children, actually, before, at least in this country, before that vaccine is out there. I think once released, I think in a better world, it would be the CDC that would define priorities for who would get the vaccine. I mean, we have 330 million people in this country. There's not going to be 330 million doses that roll out there, or 660 million. So it's likely to be 2-dose vaccines. And it also, I think it'll be more than one vaccine. I think we're talking actually probably about several vaccines that will roll out. And so the CDC in theory would define priorities. So priority one would be, healthcare workers, people who work in pharmacies, grocery stores, meatpacking plants, nursing homes, and then sort of have priority 2, priority 3. That would be the sensible way to do it. Hopefully that's the way it'll work out.
Thank you, Dr. Offit. Anyone want to add to that?
Phil Dermott here. I just said briefly that our initial plans are to test the vaccine in both younger and older adults, and we're developing our plans now to develop to test the vaccine in children as well. But that would follow initial testing in adults.
Great, thank you. Also to you, Dr. Dormitzer, developing vaccines is difficult science, and the Ebola vaccine is a great example, I think. So why is this, and how does the vaccine approval process differ from a typical prescription treatment?
So vaccines are special because you're not taking people who are already sick, giving them a medication, and watching them get better. Instead, you're giving the vaccine to well people and then watching to see if they get sick. And that, of course, as I mentioned earlier, depends on attack rates. And we really saw that issue very much in the development of Ebola vaccines, where the vaccine, whether the disease was contained, making it actually rather difficult to ascertain whether the vaccine was working as intended. So that's clearly one of the challenges. In emergency situations, there is the conventional approach to licensure as well. And there are also special provisions such as emergency use authorization and treatment INDs that are pathways through the Department of Health and Human Services that can allow for vaccine use in emergency situations. So there are some additional options, though they don't take the place of licensure. They're things that can be done as interim steps while the path to licensure progresses.
Terrific, thank you. So let's see. So once we have a vaccine, I think Dr. Offit, you just mentioned, distribution of it will be interesting. In fact, probably a Herculean effort in both New Jersey and around the world. So what can we do now to help that process before we even get there? Anyone?
I'm not sure what's meant by help. What do you think is meant by help?
I guess to better prepare, to help the process, help prepare for the process.
Yeah, I think I think that there are things, no doubt, that we're going to find out after this vaccine is approved. Because I don't think it's going to go through the standard FDA licensing process. I mean, Phil alluded to this. It'll be more of sort of a kind of EUE FDA approval, which is a somewhat lighter hand by the FDA than you would typically have. Or said another way, it's not going to go through the FDA vaccine committee, vaccine advisory committee, which normally would happen. So I think when it gets out there, I think we need to try and manage expectations to some extent in two ways. One is that I think we're going to learn just how effective this vaccine is somewhat later. In other words, I think most likely this vaccine will protect against moderate to severe disease for a few years, would be my guess. I don't think it's going to be like the measles vaccine, where basically you're protected against sort of mild, moderate, and severe disease for the rest of your life. I mean, that's a great vaccine. This is probably going to be somewhat short-lived protection, meaning years, not decades. And I think it would be incomplete protection, meaning protection against moderate to severe disease, but not all disease. In fact, you may still have people who are getting having mildly symptomatic reinfection where they shed and are contagious. That's possible. So I think you need to make people understand that. Secondly, now you're putting something to tens of millions of people that's only been in thousands of people. That's when you find out things you didn't know before. There may be safety signals that you hadn't anticipated. And so you need to prepare, I think, for that so that people don't have unrealistic expectations of this thing.
Yeah, and this is Eric, to sort of build on that, if I could, I really recommend a state-level task force right now, and that task force should include the heads of within your administration of all the key departments, health, housing, transportation, et cetera, and then you have to create some subgroups. So the subgroups are developed depending on which areas we think this vaccine may be recommended for. So as I mentioned, if it's the elderly, if it's those with comorbidities, if it's children, which is unlikely, but let's still scenario plan for that and really figure out, okay, if we have minimal number of doses, how do we get that out? If we can vaccinate 50% of the population. I mean, it's a basic risk communications plan, right, based on the different populations. But if we can do that planning now, and we've got a few months to do that, if we can do that planning now and test some of our theories of reaching these populations during flu season, I think you guys would be in a stellar position for a COVID vaccine.
This is Dr. Conway. I think that suggestion is a most excellent one. Certainly, or I should say that the public health messaging, right straight up and down from the government or the medical community and the government down to the frontline workers needs to be consistent. It needs to certainly rest on a truthful foundation, which puts us at a stark contrast to the anti-vax people that deal in a lot of misinformation and false facts. It is we have to stick with a solid foundation of science-based messaging that's consistent over time and repeated. And I think we need, as I've been involved in the vaccine movement for a number of years as a physician and here in public health, I continue in both roles. I would say that we need to maybe punch it up. It's a little hard for me because I don't like a lot of emotion and hyperbole in anything I do, but we have had in the public health community be a little bit more aggressive with our messaging, and we probably are going to have to do this in this case as well. I mean, it's one thing if you are suffering from any of the various addictions that people have, from nicotine to carbohydrates to alcohol that we know has bad outcomes, but those things generally redound to the individual. It's quite another thing when you sort of refuse to and put aside the social contract and engage in behavior that injures somebody else. And I think we need to be very clear about that as we discuss vaccine policy, because it doesn't rest with the individual. We are talking about a cohort of people, of a state, of a nation, of age groups, and we have a responsibility to one another, and we have to focus on that and reinforce that. And if we do that, we'll do a better job at getting this vaccine into the hands of the right persons at the right time.
For sure. Great. Thank you, Assemblyman. So Dr. Offit, can you talk to us a little bit about herd immunity? I mean, what exactly is it? What does it mean? And can it actually play a role in COVID spread and containment?
Right. So herd immunity means a significant enough percentage of the population have developed immunity to this virus that essentially stops the spread, which you need to have happen, because in this population of 300 plus million people, there are hundreds of thousands of people who can't be vaccinated. They really depend on the herd to protect them. Now, I think that population immunity is best achieved here by a vaccine. I don't think natural infection would be able to would be so great that we actually you saw the virus disappear because a critical percentage of the population was naturally infected. I don't think that's going to happen. So, which was true with measles. I mean, I was a child of the 1950s. I had measles. And because I had measles, I am now protected against measles for the rest of my life. But every year there was a susceptible cohort of people, so 2 to 3 million people would get measles, 48,000 would be hospitalized, and 500 would die. So I think we can develop herd immunity through a vaccine, and that's the way it worked with measles. So measles disappeared once we had a vaccine. We eliminated that virus from this country in 2000. The reason it's come back is because a critical number of parents have chosen not to vaccinate their children, but it's not because we couldn't do it. So I think population immunity is best achieved by vaccination.
And I would recently people were looking at the Swedish example where they have basically said, well, do whatever you want. We're not going to really take any measures as a government to push back against the spread of coronavirus disease. And indeed, they have seen more cases of disease than similarly situated nations. And as they went out to test their population for the presence of antibodies. Now, these antibody tests, you can argue about how good they are at this moment, but after all this time, they find that only 7% of their population has had has coronavirus antibodies. And so if you are reaching for that 60+% antibody acquisition rate among the population, you can see it's going to take quite a long time to get there, and how many people are going to die in the meantime. So that approach, I think, is called into question. So I agree. I think it just reinforces what Dr. Dormitzer just said, and that is, vaccine is going to be the thing that really does the heavy lifting in terms of saving lives.
Terrific, thank you. And so we're rounding out our time here. So I'd like to ask each of our panelists if you have a quick parting thought. So Erica?
Sure. As legislators, you have an amazing platform to communicate with your constituents. So as the Assemblyman said, whenever you can, let them know that vaccines are safe and effective. They need to continue routine immunization and sit tight for a COVID vaccine.
Thanks, Erica. Dr. Offit?
Sure. I have no doubt that we can make a successful COVID-19 vaccine. The only thing, my only plea is let this go through the process the way it normally goes through the process, as it always has ever since the polio vaccine. Make sure we subject these vaccines to the right kind of testing before we put it into tens of millions of people.
Thank you. And Dr. Dormitzer?
I guess it's just a word of appreciation for the people who are really out there on the front lines of fighting this virus, whether they're healthcare workers, people developing vaccines, or other people providing essential services that put them in harm's way with this virus.
Terrific, thank you. And Assemblyman, we are going to, first of all, I'd like to thank all of our speakers and all of our participants for joining us. And Assemblyman, we're going to give you the last word, sir.
Well, that's very kind of you. I just wanted to highlight what Dr. Offit said. We do need to follow the regular processes and make sure that the vaccines that are developed to fight coronavirus have been as well tested and studied as we can possibly make those efforts. You just think about what happened with measles. You had you're talking about trials that involve thousands of people that have been replicated across many nations and many systems and have been shown to be effective, and yet a fraudulent study conducted in England that had maybe 30 people in it, 30 persons in it that were hand selected to produce a result, has had us fighting against misinformation that spread across the world. The lie spread straight across the world, and we're seeing we're having a difficult time, maintaining and achieving the kind of vaccination rates that we ought, and we're seeing the resurgence of diseases that we had quelled and basically eliminated in our own country. And so we need to be very careful to make sure that this vaccine, which is going to hit the market with great notoriety and be very well scrutinized, as it should, but you can just imagine what will happen if people are able, and people lie about everything, but if people are able to transmit information that will cause this virus not to be used, and perhaps cause a repeat of not only the lives that are lost, but the economic damage, the great economic damage that has occurred in its wake. And I would just end and get close to the end by saying, we can recover an economy. We can't recover lives lost. I mean, you can't bring people back from the dead, and so we've got to, with right on our side, with science at our side, with truthfulness emanating from our mouths all the time, go forward and bring and do all we can to make the world a safer, better place going forward. I mean, that sounds pie in the sky, I know, but I think why not? It's a lofty goal. And we can, if we can't achieve it, we at least must strive for it. Good morning, everybody.
Indeed. Thank you, Assemblyman. And thank you, everyone. Please stay safe and healthy. And thank you for your time.